Hello and welcome to the Culture Codecast, the podcast series by the HRM Committee of the Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry. My name is Ruhie Pande. I'm the Group CHRO and the Chief Marketing Officer at the Sterlite Group, and I'm also the Chairperson of the HRM Committee of BCCI. In this series, we're exploring the themes shaping the future of work and workplace culture in India, with insights from leaders who have authored our HR Thought leadership booklets. Today's episode is titled Bridging Generations, the Multi-Generational Advantage, and it's based on the booklet authored by Kaushiki Srivastava. Kaushiki is an HR professional with 16 plus years of experience across varied industries like manufacturing, metals and mining, alcoholic beverages, media and entertainment, and gaming and software. She has piloted the workplace transformation, talent and people management, and D&I agenda for dynamic global organizations. She has a blend of experience ranging from industrial relations to strategic business HR, tech transformation, compensation and benefit strategy, talent development and management strategy, organizational development, social sustainability, future of work, communications, and employer branding. Kaushiki is a member of the HRM Committee of Bombay Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Society for Human Resources Management, and National HRD Network. Kaushiki is also a certified coach, a 5OB practitioner, a recruitment analyst, and specializes in competency mapping, behavioral event interviewing, assessment centers, and D&I. An avid reader with a passion for writing and exploring different cultural destinations, Kaushiki also dabbles in music and writing. Welcome to the Culture Codecast, Kaushiki.
Thank you so much, Ruhie. It's such a pleasure.
Right. And now we will dive straight in to gather more insights about the booklet you have authored, which is all about multi-generational workforce, and gather your insights. So my first question to you, Kaushiki, is what drove you to explore generational dynamics at work?
Well, Ruhie, this topic came to me quite organically. It's been more than 16 years in this field and with so many different organizations. I've seen something that has stood out everywhere has been how multi-era the workplaces are, right? You have baby boomers and Gen X in the leadership who've also built a company's foundation. They sort of hold the legacy, and they're sitting beside millennials and Gen Zs who are these digital first, very vocal, very value driven, and are also looking for a very different meaning and purpose. And now you also have like a Gen Alpha kind of a crowd that's coming in specifically certain industries. So it's a very incredible mix. It's super challenging. In many organizations, you see a lot of conversation happening about gender diversity and inclusion. To that extent, even working towards industry and non-industry inclusion. But somehow the generational gap often goes unaddressed. Even though it's sort of, it's very impactful to how people actually collaborate on ground every single day. So I really wanted to unpack this, and not from really a lens of difference, but what kind of an advantage can companies actually draw from it, instead of actually looking at how the generational divide is, creating schisms in an organizational design. I think there is some sort of, magic or some trick here that we can actually take and use the wisdom of the older generations with this very novice knowledge that the new generations bring in for the next generation of workplaces.
Okay, my second question to you, therefore, Kaushiki, would be that what are the biggest gaps you observe in intergenerational communication?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. Honestly, the biggest gap is assumptions and the communication at a baseline, right? Every generation has its own stories about the other, and everyone's obviously not the hero in the other one's story. I think I've seen senior leaders assume that younger employees may be impatient, entitled, or perhaps not ready for the grind or not willing, or the exact opposite, right? They get stereotyped. And similarly, the younger lot would be sort of stereotyping the older generations as resistant, not understanding flexibility. Not all of this is really true, but I think these biases really color everyday communication. A lot of misalignment also happens around actual feedback, right? Gen Z and millennials will prefer frequent, informal feedback on the go. They see it as a conversation. Whereas if you are working with a Gen X, they grew up with annual appraisals, top down reviews, and sort of like a structured mechanism. So when a younger employee walks up to an older generation, 2 generations above, and says, "Can I talk about my career plan?" Probably the other one's going to come out, the senior manager is going to come and misread it and say that they're being overconfident or they're just overstepping. There's also a sort of medium technology gap sometimes that happens. I think we're seeing how people are so digital first, chatting on Teams rather than picking up the phone call, and that's not how the previous generation actually operated. So there's a lot of miscommunication and assumption that happens around, why didn't she respond to my email, or he just said okay in response to my long elaborate email. So I think the whole point of these gaps is to break those assumptions, to start really being aware of communication styles, to really listen without labeling to each other.
No, you're absolutely right, Kaushiki. In fact, a few weeks back, a very senior leader in the organization reached out to me because there are a bunch of Gen Zs who are entering the workforce with him. He is a little bit of a very traditional mindset and clearly very, not able to associate or relate to how these people are wired. And thereby, I was very happy when he came to me to ask that, is it possible for us to get trained on, how do you kind of address and how do you get the best out of this new workforce which is entering the organization? So very, very relevant points there, Kaushiki. So which brings me to the third question about thereby, what is it that we can do? So in your opinion, what practices or programs help create generational synergy?
Thank you for that question, Ruhie. And I must say that I think it's a very welcome thing for a leader to forthcomingly sort of step in and say, hey, how can I sort of develop and recognize that this is a new generation on the floor? And I think very few organizations are starting there. So I would actually say that it's the intentionality, honestly. Before a practice or a program, it's the intention. And I just saw that in the example you gave me. So I would probably begin from there to establish that intentionality, right? You're embracing a new generation just like you're embracing any other form of diversity or differentiation, and you have to acknowledge the value that it brings. So rather than a token number and a token representation, or just having like this system in which you can just say, okay, I've got my 2% from this generation and my 10% from this, you must actually have that intentionality in a few of your practices and programs and start small. For example, the simplest thing is a reverse mentoring, right? It can happen right away. You've got multi-generational teams working as of now. You would have them in tech, you would have them in probably on the field, on the ground, on sales, you'll probably have them at the shop floor. The idea is to be able to create ways in which they can cross-learn, a younger lot, and I don't want to stereotype, but a younger lot could actually bring in a lot of different worldly wisdom and a lot of education with regards to probably what's not okay anymore with regards to boundaries and maybe even on mental health and culture, while also being able to reverse mentor seniors on digital tech tools and probably social media branding, influencers, or even smarter ways to do the same parts, whether it was on Excel that could run better, faster, versus a different way of looking at a blueprint on the ground. And I think the seniors, of course, come in with years of experience and their wisdom in which they can familiarize you with policies, processes, successes, failures, and guide in terms of risks and calculated risks that can and cannot be taken. I think intentionally creating cross-generational project teams where you can, where the risk is perhaps not extremely high, and you have the time to actually induct 2 types of groups or 3 types of groups, would be really good. I've personally had experience doing this very deliberately, and I've seen that the output quality has doubled because ideas were challenged but also refined, at the same time. And the end goal was clear, that we have to come out with something. We cannot just come out disagreeing with each other. And thirdly, I think it's also about intentional dialogues, collaboration tools being introduced, and communication adaptiveness, right? So, structured conversations, being able to exchange with each other. The listening without labeling can be encouraged when you have sessions like these, right? And you recognize and reward both tenure as well as, not as much the tenure, but the innovation and idea that could have only come from fresh pair of eyes. So while a person is receiving a long service award, I think it's equally important for a person with maybe 1 year of tenure but a brilliant idea that had an impact, to be equally or equitably recognized and bring them on the same plane. Bringing visual, boards like Miro boards or Notion, because brainstorming can look different for people, different ways. So having them sort of come into a room together, maybe through a Teams breakout or on these boards, could be different ways in which they collab. Maybe, you have to assess the way in which people find comfort in interactions. But these are just some of the very low-hanging fruits that I can suggest.
Now, very interesting points, Kaushiki, and that then brings me to my next question. And I want to ask you that I'm sure you would have implemented or seen a lot of the good work organizations are doing around managing this multi-generational dynamics. And thereby, can you share any success stories in managing intergenerational teams?
Super. Thank you so much for that question. And I have so many of them, but I won't, regale everyone with so many stories. I did recently actually write about 1 or 2 of my own experiences. One was when I was myself a very junior employee in my first or my second organization, and we were, pretty much revolutionizing HR tech for the organization. So we were moving on to SAP, and we had like these new things to learn, and so we were workshopping, and this was a group of HR folks that were in the same room getting trained, and we had a project manager with us, and we had all tenures and generations, right? So I was in my 20s, and there were people who were in their 40s, 50s, 30s in the room, and it was so loud, the room was so loud, and there were such different voices, right? There were people who were looking at, how can I do this faster? Why do I have to click this button 15 times? Versus somebody who was saying, why do I have to do this at all? Like, wasn't the Excel good enough? And I'm okay, I'm comfortable with the piece of paper, etc. And I remember that for the first few times, we had a lot of, I think we were not coming out with the actual outcome of those project group meetings and the trainings. And then I saw what the project manager and the tech trainer did, right? They created spaces for us to challenge and to comply. And then each voice was heard, and there was an objective that was set right at the beginning, saying we have to agree to disagree or agree together, but we have to come out with this step done today, otherwise we're not getting out of this room. And I think somewhere, over a period of time, that started to work for us, because we started to appreciate the wisdom of why there was a few suspicions to the model, or there were a couple of, very cynical views to some of the changes, because they were coming from a historical customer perspective, having to deal with different types of managers and employees. And we were coming from a different narrative of how to get more work done in less time. And that soon started to get appreciated. So I do feel that it doesn't happen overnight, and this was a big example of it. It takes a very important role of a project manager or sort of a POC to structure these things and to sort of orchestrate these things into a productive environment. And most importantly, eventually, you have to realize you're working for the bigger goal here. This is not an individual personal agenda. No one's going to come out victorious if the bigger goal doesn't get resolved. And that's one of my biggest examples that I can give you. I do also want to share a second one, which is a very quick one that I wanted to tell you about, is campaign creation, right? And I've seen this in my current organization. I see this in my previous experiences. We've had years and years of experience, marketing professionals who've come and said this will work, this won't work. We know the market, we know how customers would react, or enthusiasm would percolate. And then we had a bunch of new people whom we hired who actually just brought in simple information to us saying, what is my 13-year-old listening to, or what's my 16-year-old playing, or what is an 18-year-old actually looking at when they're looking at the billboards. Are we consuming information digitally, or are we consuming things on print? And a combination of this and what it created for campaigns on different products was completely different. It was not binary. It sort of had a best of both, and definitely they've had impacts in the market.
Kaushiki, I think these are amazing examples, and I guess the more diverse the minds on a particular challenge, I think the results are far more beneficial to the organization and kind of to the situation at hand. So really very, very relevant thoughts, and I'm learning a lot from this conversation. As I'm talking, I'm thinking of all the various scenarios where perhaps one can go back and implement a lot of the thoughts which you are sharing. So my last question to you would be, Kaushiki, I'm sure the listeners would want some very specific suggestions. Some of the leaders who might be listening in to a podcast may want some actionable initiatives which they can do. So what are one or two interventions that any leader can try to build generational inclusion?
Thank you so much, Ruhie, and that's such a nice question. I go back to the initial thing of start small but with intentionality. And I think the first step would be to intentionally create a mixed learning or project group or pods. Today people have a lot of fancy names for these groups. They call them squads and they call them pods. I would say that start there, intentionally try to bring in different voices. When they collaborate regularly, inclusion just becomes organic. There could be weekly show and share, or sort of learn as you go kind of models, where a person could be presenting a new idea, new tool, or a work hack, and at the same time someone could be presenting legacy information. We've done something of this sort where it's so important for our newbies to understand the legacy of what they're trying to create or recreate today. So they need to know the sense of pride comes from these generations because they've had a different role. And at the same time, the older generation has to have the appreciation for the very different value of time that exists today for the next generation, or the sort of less is more philosophy that exists today. Another thing that I would definitely advise leadership to do is to role model curiosity. If you walk up to someone in your team and say, hey, can you teach me how to do this on Canva, instead of a presentation, PPT, I think it just builds that mutual respect, because you're not sitting on a high horse and saying, I know my stuff, I've hired you to do yours. Let's not enter each other's world and tell each other what to do or whatever. I think this creates that sort of synergy where that openness of sharing comes in. I'm just giving one idea, it's more on the creative side, but this could very well just have to work on engagement, for example. So many times we go and do FGDs and with young engineers on the shop floor and say, hey, what's not working for you? But are we really going and dialoguing with them saying, hey, if you had to do this differently, how would you? Perhaps an answer lies there, and so role modeling curiosity, not being worried about the answers you might get. It's very important for leaders to role model. And the third is just adapt communication. You have to try different ways to communicate. Some generations have always worked on open house, town hall kind of formats. Some work with emails, prefer Teams chatting, or quick thumbs up on an email is enough for them to acknowledge. And in-person conversations matter a lot to a certain type. I think it's important to have an adaptability and knowing what suits what occasion. It signals a respect for different working styles. So these are some of the very initial ways in which you can actually start to put this in your culture. Reverse mentoring, I say, is an easy, quick fix, I would say, right away. So I've given 4 suggestions instead of 3, but I'll stop there. Otherwise, I'll keep going on.
No, thank you very much, Kaushiki. I think you're absolutely right about reverse mentoring. Everything I know about AI today, and extensively, we're going to launch a lot of those tools across the entire HR life cycle. I pretty much learned from my sons because their, I think, adaptability to AI, the way they understand it, is very different. So I think similar things, if it can be implemented in the organization, I think the benefits are many. And then, of course, like you rightly said, it creates that culture of curiosity where people feel included, and that, of course, has long-term benefits for the organization. So thank you very much, Kaushiki, for speaking to us and sharing your valuable inputs. And I'm sure that all the people listening in have learned a lot. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruhi. And again, it's a pleasure being on the other side of the table. It was a wonderful podcast. Thank you.